Welcome back to the Deep Dive, where we cut through the noise to get straight to the crucial insights. Today, we've got a focused mission. We're equipping you with the essential knowledge to master your upcoming test on the early Americas and European encounters.
That's right. We've taken a deep dive into a wealth of sources, distilling the most important nuggets covering the vibrant pre-Columbian Americas, Europe on the brink of profound change, and the complex interactions that followed. Consider this your curated guide to understanding the bigger picture.
Yeah, we'll unpack everything from the fascinating theories of how the first people arrived here to why Europeans suddenly embarked on these epic voyages and the dramatically different worlds that collided. We'll also tackle pivotal events like the Pueblo Revolt and compare the distinct colonial styles of Spain, France, and the Netherlands. Really key stuff for your test.
Our goal isn't just to list facts, it's to connect the dots, highlight those aha moments, and give you the foundational understanding you need to feel truly confident and well-informed. Okay, let's jump in.
So let's kick things off with a fundamental question. How did people even get to the Americas in the first place? We have two prominent theories that paint quite different pictures.
What's truly fascinating here is how our understanding continues to evolve, driven by archaeology and scientific advancements, especially given the scarcity of written records from this deep past. One longstanding idea is the glacier theory, often called the Beringia land bridge hypothesis.
Right, the land bridge.
Exactly. Around 9 to 15,000 years ago, during a colder period, this vast landmass named Beringia emerged, connecting Asia and North America. It's believed early inhabitants, probably following migrating game, crossed this bridge and then slowly moved southward, eventually populating both continents. And, genetic markers shared between modern Asians and Native Americans strongly support this.
But the glacier theory isn't the only narrative, is it? More recently, an intriguing alternative has emerged, challenging some of our previous assumptions.
Exactly. This is the Kelp Highway theory. It suggests an alternative migration route where early populations traveled down the west coast of the Americas by boat.
By boat. Okay.
Yeah. This theory posits that these intrepid peoples, using canoes, hugged the coastline, sustaining themselves on the incredibly rich marine life, think whales, seals, abundant fish. This coastal kelp highway could have allowed for a much quicker, maybe more direct migration than a slow overland journey. And recent research, particularly along the South American West Coast, offers some pretty compelling evidence for this seafaring alternative.
So once these early peoples arrived, however they got here, what did life look like across the Americas? What were some general hallmarks of Native American societies, particularly in North America?
Well, there was immense diversity, of course, but certain broad trends did emerge. While Mesoamerican and South American civilizations like the Aztecs and Incas developed these massive urban centers thanks to large-scale agriculture, especially maize.
Corn, yeah.
Right, corn. Many North American tribes were often smaller, more nomadic, and remarkably adept at adapting to their immediate environment. Their survival often combined hunting, gathering, and smaller-scale farming. What becomes clear across these diverse societies is that success wasn't about a single advanced technology, maybe, but a profound, nuanced understanding of and reciprocal relationship with their specific environment. Unlike the highly centralized empires down south, North American tribes often lacked large-scale political unity. They frequently competed for resources.
And that made them vulnerable later.
Sadly, yes. It made them more vulnerable to European exploitation later, sometimes by playing into existing intertribal rivalries. Societal structures often featured gendered labor, with women typically managing farming and men focusing on hunting and warfare. Many societies were also polytheistic, deeply connecting their religious beliefs to the natural world.
That emphasis on environmental adaptation is truly a powerful insight. Let's zero in on some specific examples of how different tribes not just survived, but thrived by ingeniously working with their unique environments. First, the Pueblo people.
Right. The Pueblo tribes, established in the arid southwest United States areas like modern Arizona and New Mexico from about 750 to 1300 CE, they were masters of survival in a remarkably harsh landscape.
Hot and dry.
Very. To combat the intense heat and scarcity, they built iconic adobe brick homes, often nestled into cliff dwellings, which provided natural insulation. Their true genius, though, was in irrigation. They engineered complex systems of channels and reservoirs to capture and store the heavy but infrequent desert rains.
Wow.
Their diet was centered on staple crops like corn, beans, and squash, supplemented by small game. Limited resources often led to conflicts over water and hunting grounds. These were relatively small civilizations, and their decline around 1300 CE, exemplified by sites like Mesa Verde, is often attributed to climate change, a warming period that led to even less rain and game.
Okay, moving to a completely contrasting environment. What about the Chinook people of the Pacific Northwest? Totally different.
Totally different. The Chinook, located in what's now Oregon and Washington, inhabited a land of incredible abundance. Rainy, green, teeming with natural resources. They were intimately tied to the ocean, rivers, and dense forests, enjoying ample seafood and big game. This abundance fostered a strong, stratified society with clear social distinctions.
Stratified how?
Well, a unique cultural marker of their elite class, for instance, was the practice of flattening children's heads during their first year of life to signify high status.
Really?
Yeah. And they skillfully utilized the region's tall trees to construct large longhouses and intricately carved totem poles, which could stand 30 to 50 feet tall and served as visual records of family history and stories. What's noteworthy about the Chinook is that they maintained their strength and presence even as European influence began to spread, remaining largely untouched until much later.
And down here in California, we have the Chumash. How do they adapt to our beautiful, yet often demanding coastline?
Ugh, the Chumash. Settling on the California coast around 1000 CE, they masterfully leveraged the ocean and their impressive ingenuity. They had an abundance of seafood and game, but also adapted local land resources. While large-scale agriculture wasn't their primary focus, they innovatively utilized acorns. They developed this crucial process of cleansing them of bitter tannins, then ground them into flour to make a flatbread.
Acorn bread, okay.
And a significant aspect of their economy was their sophisticated shell currency, meticulously crafted from specific shells found only along their stretch of coast.
So they controlled the money supply.
Effectively, yeah. It gave them a monopoly on currency production, facilitating extensive trade throughout California. They were renowned for their craftsmanship, especially basket weaving, considered among the best in the world, and building advanced seagoing canoes called tomals. Tomals. They waterproofed both baskets and canoes by using naturally occurring tar found in the region. This allowed them to be highly mobile, undertaking prolific voyages to places like the Channel Islands, making them one of the most well-traveled groups in the region.
Fascinating. And finally, let's briefly touch on the Iroquois in the Northeast. Beyond adapting to the cold, they had some interesting political ideas, didn't they?
Indeed. While also using communal longhouses to adapt to the colder New York State climate, the Iroquois are particularly noteworthy for their political innovation. They formed a powerful confederation of 5 tribes.
A confederation?
Yeah, a remarkable precursor to later American federalism, you could argue. Sachems, or representatives from each tribe, met in a higher council, demonstrating an advanced form of representative government that unified disparate groups.
So that's a glimpse into the vibrant and diverse Americas. But across the Atlantic, Europe was also undergoing massive changes that would propel them towards these new shores. What was the bigger picture for Europe on the eve of exploration around 1492? What set this moment apart?
Well, Europe in the late 15th century was a society on the brink of profound transformation, slowly emerging from centuries of flux known as the Middle Ages. Imagine living in a walled city, constantly fearing outside threats, travel a perilous rarity. For most Europeans, life was incredibly difficult and short, within a feudal society dominated by lords, knights, and serfs. And then, of course, the Black Death in the 1340s.
Devastating.
Absolutely massive shock, wiped out an estimated 1/3 of Europe's population. Yet, by 1450, a resilient and rejuvenated Europe was ready for change, with a growing population and renewed energy. The Christian Church remained the most powerful institution, providing a unifying force across disparate regions through Latin and sacraments, and profoundly shaping people's worldview. It was a continent poised, perhaps unknowingly, for an unprecedented outward expansion.
It sounds like a complex mix of recovery and ambition. What truly lit the fire for these ambitious voyages across the unknown seas? Or were the big motives, and crucially, what technological advancements made these explorations even possible? Because you need the tools, right?
You absolutely need the tools. Historians often summarize the core motives with 3 powerful G's: God, glory, and gold. But the real insight here, especially for your test, is how these seemingly disparate motivations, spirituality, personal ambition, raw economics, converged with nascent technologies to create this almost unstoppable drive for exploration.
Okay, break those down. Gold first.
Right. For gold, the Crusades had introduced Europeans to Eastern luxuries like spices, silk, porcelain. But the overland Silk Road was becoming increasingly expensive and dangerous. Brigands, middlemen collecting hefty taxes.
Cutting into profit.
Big time. So there was this intense desire to find a direct, cheaper water route to Asia and the wealthy Spice Islands, cutting out those intermediaries and opening up immense new profits.
Okay, thank God.
For God, particularly in strongly Catholic nations like Spain and Portugal, there was a fervent desire to spread Christianity, convert new souls. The success of the Reconquista of Spain's 800-year campaign against Islam, ending famously in 1492, really fueled this religious drive. Leaders like Prince Henry the Navigator, Queen Isabella, saw it as continuing their holy war overseas.
And glory.
Yeah.
Fame and fortune.
And for glory, yeah. Tales of exotic lands, incredible wealth like Marco Polo's travels describing Kublai Khan's palace captured the European imagination. The sheer adventure of discovery promised personal fame and national prestige. Plus, political rivalries between emerging European nations, Spain, Portugal, England, France, spurred this competitive race to claim new lands and resources. Boost national standing.
And tech that made it happen.
Right, the enablers. These grand ambitions were finally made possible by critical innovations.
Yeah.
Development of caravels.
The ships.
Yeah. Lighter, more maneuverable ships with triangular sails. Improved astrolabes and sextants for celestial navigation. More accurate map making. And importantly, advanced military tech like gunpowder and cannons. These were the tools that turned the dreams of God, glory, and gold into reality.
That's a comprehensive picture. And speaking of early explorations, we know the Vikings actually reached North America long before Columbus. We touched on them briefly. But why did their ventures fizzle out so quickly?
That's a great question, often overlooked but important context. The Vikings, led by figures like Leif Erikson, did indeed reach North America, specifically Newfoundland, Canada, around 1000 CE, a full 500 years before Columbus.
Wow, 500 years.
Yeah. Their initial motivation seems to have been trade with the native populations they encountered. However, interactions quickly turned violent. The key reason for their ultimate departure, the thing to really grasp, was a fundamental imbalance. There simply weren't enough Vikings to subdue the numerous native groups they met.
Numbers game.
Exactly. Faced with overwhelming hostility and just not enough manpower to establish permanent, secure settlements, they were forced to abandon their ventures. It really highlights the importance of sustained colonial effort and, frankly, numerical superiority for later European success.
Okay, this is where it truly gets impactful and maybe difficult. When Europeans and Native Americans finally met in the late 15th century, it wasn't just a clash of different peoples, it was a collision of fundamentally different worldviews. How did those profound differences manifest, and what were the immediate implications?
We can see this immediately in the writings of early explorers like Christopher Columbus. His journal entries reveal a deeply biased perspective that would tragically shape European attitudes for centuries. He described the native Lucayans of San Salvador as very well made with handsome bodies, but also tellingly as neither carry nor know anything of arms, observing they had no iron and were not violent.
So seeing them as weak, maybe?
Weak. And crucially, he perceived they had no religion, making them seem like good servants and intelligent and easily made Christians. His writings were aimed squarely at the Spanish monarchs, emphasizing their potential as laborers and converts to secure future funding. He essentially portrayed them as simple, childlike, and exploitable, reinforcing a justification for subjugation.
So it wasn't merely physical differences, but deeply ingrained, contrasting beliefs about the world that defined these early encounters. Historian Gary Nash, in Red, White, and Black, really unpacks these core distinctions, right?
Absolutely. The differences were fundamental, influencing everything from daily life to the inevitable conflicts. Let's look at 3 critical areas that really underpin these contrasting worldviews. You'll want to know these for the test. First, consider man's relationship to the environment. The European view, deeply rooted in the biblical Genesis command to subdue the earth and have dominion over every living thing, saw the natural world primarily as a resource to be exploited for man's gain.
Use it up.
Pretty much. For Europeans, the secular and sacred were distinct, and a burgeoning scientific revolution fostered confidence in controlling and manipulating nature. In stark contrast, Native Americans held an ethos where every part of the natural world was sacred. They believed the world was inhabited by spiritual power, like Manitou for some woodland tribes, this life force present in all things. To exploit land or disrespect nature was to break a mutual trust or reciprocity, inviting spiritual retaliation.
That's a profound difference right there. One of an inherent sacredness versus resource. What about their understanding of property? That was a big one too, wasn't it?
Huge. Second, the concept of property diverged sharply. For Europeans, private ownership of property was fundamental to their culture, symbolized by fences, reinforced by inheritance laws, courts. Land ownership was intricately linked to political power, social structure.
Owning land meant something specific.
Exactly. For Native Americans, however, this concept was largely incomprehensible. While tribes recognized territorial boundaries within those limits, land was held in common. It was seen not as a commodity to be bought and sold, but as a gift from the Creator, to be used with care, not for exclusive individual possession.
And finally, how did these societies define personal identity and ambition? The individual versus the group.
Right. Third, personal identity was also vastly different. Europeans were largely acquisitive, competitive, and highly valued individualism. They believed in opportunities to improve one's status through industriousness or valor. In contrast, Native American traditions emphasized the collectivity rather than the individual. Given common resources and often less hierarchical societies, an accumulative spirit and personal ambition were often seen as inappropriate, sometimes even leading to ostracism rather than admiration. These fundamental contrasting values led to continuous misunderstandings and conflicts, the seeds of so much future struggle.
With these profound differences in worldview, it's no surprise that European colonization unfolded very differently depending on which nation was doing the colonizing. Let's compare and contrast the distinct approaches of the Spanish, French, and Dutch. This is a critical comparison for understanding early colonial America, definitely something you'll see on the test.
Okay, let's start with the Spanish, who were the first to arrive in 1492. Their model was largely one of extraction and dominance, often summarized by the term Black Legend, a narrative, often promoted by rival European powers, that emphasized the brutality and exploitation of the Spanish conquistadors. Their primary economic goal was the swift acquisition of precious metals, gold and silver, from places like Mexico and South America, much more than establishing trade relationships initially.
Just take it.
Basically, yeah. They simply took resources. Spanish society in the New World was largely male-dominated, soldiers, priests. There was a purposeful push for these men to intermarry with native women to create a new generation, forge political alliances, as few Spanish women were encouraged to emigrate early on. Religiously, they enforced forced conversion to Catholicism, often brutally at the point of a sword. Natives were herded into missions to be secularized, trained. While ultimately successful in making the region largely Catholic, early conversions often involved natives simply adding Christianity to their existing polytheistic beliefs, rather than fully replacing them.
And there were critics even then.
Oh, yes. Notably, Bartolomé de las Casas, a former slave owner turned priest, famously criticized these abuses. His writings led to the new laws intended to protect native rights, but enforcement.
Well, it was often weak on the ground.
The Pueblo Rebellion in 1680 is a powerful example of Native American resistance to this Spanish model. What specific factors triggered it, and what long-term changes did it actually force upon the Spanish? That seems really important. Absolutely. The Pueblo Rebellion is a critical historical turning point. It was led by the shaman Pope in the Southwest, and it's remarkable because numerous Pueblo villages, typically disunited, actually coordinated attacks against the Spanish. The triggers were multifaceted. The oppressive encomienda system, which gave Spanish settlers control over Native American labor, forced conversions, suppression of traditional Pueblo religious practices, and the devastating population decline from disease and overwork.
It's a combination of awful factors.
Exactly. In 1680, the coordinated revolt killed about 250 Spanish settlers and effectively drove them out of the area for roughly a decade. When the Spanish eventually returned after Pope's death, they had learned a valuable, hard lesson. They had to be significantly less oppressive, at least in that region.
So it worked, to an extent.
To an extent, yes. In that region, the brutal enslavement of natives and forced conversions were formally ended, granting Pueblo people more freedoms and allowing them to maintain more of their cultural and religious practices. It was a rare, successful example of indigenous resistance forcing a tangible change in colonial policy.
Okay, so that's the Spanish model. In stark contrast, the French seemed to take a much softer approach, often called the gentle hand. Why was their model so different?
Indeed, the French model, starting around 1534, was fundamentally different, primarily driven by different economic resources and a much smaller colonial population. Their initial interest was in lucrative cod fishing, but it quickly shifted to the highly profitable fur trade, beaver, rabbit, deer, mink for European elites.
Ah, furs. So they needed the Native Americans.
Precisely. This economic model inherently required a cooperative rather than purely exploitative relationship with Native Americans who did the trapping. The French traded desirable European goods like metals, guns, alcohol for furs. French kings maintained tight control over their colonies, and their colonial population remained incredibly small. Only about 70,000 by 1754, compared to maybe 2.5 million English colonists by then. They just didn't encourage mass immigration.
And their religious approach.
Different, too. Jesuit priests were sent, characterized by their patience and slow conversion methods. They traveled extensively by canoe, lived among native communities, hoping for gradual adoption of Catholicism rather than forced conversions. They acknowledged native sentiments like, "Your world is different from ours." This approach fostered a far less confrontational relationship than the Spanish.
Okay, Spanish extraction, French cooperation, and finally, the Dutch. They seem to have had a very distinct commerce-driven motive that stood apart even from the French. All about business.
That's spot on. The Dutch, arriving around 1614, were primarily focused on profit above all else. Their colony of New Netherlands, which included present-day New York, was a brief but impactful episode. Their economy was based squarely on trade furs, sugar, and tragically, they became key players in the early slave trade, even bringing enslaved people to English colonies.
So New York was built for trade from the start.
Exactly. New Amsterdam, which became New York, was envisioned and developed explicitly as a world-class trading port. The Netherlands was a highly prosperous country at the time, so few Dutch citizens actually felt compelled to emigrate. Consequently, New Netherlands quickly developed a highly cosmopolitan population, with most settlers not even being Dutch. Their government promoted remarkable tolerance and equality for the time. 18 official languages, including Native American ones. They were notably home to the first Jews and Muslims in the New World, and Native American religions were practiced openly.
Why so tolerant?
Well, the Dutch had no strong religious motive for colonization, leading to a policy of freedom of religion. It was good for business, basically, attracted people. But despite its commercial success and tolerance, New Netherlands was absorbed by the English in less than 50 years.
Why so fast?
Largely because they lacked enough of their own people to defend it effectively. Many of its English settlers simply welcomed the English takeover.
Okay, beyond direct colonization, the arrival of Europeans triggered this massive, unprecedented global exchange that fundamentally reshaped continents. Let's talk about the Columbian Exchange. What was it exactly?
Right. This refers to the vast global transfer of foods, plants, animals, and, tragically, diseases across the Atlantic Ocean following Columbus's voyages. It wasn't just a one-off thing, it was a fundamental reordering of interconnected systems, profoundly reshaping continents. Vital concept for your test.
And this exchange had a truly dual nature in its impact. What was the profound effect on Europe specifically? How did it change things there?
For Europe, the impact was largely beneficial and, frankly, transformative. They experienced a radical improvement in their diet, receiving high-calorie, nutritious foods from the Americas like beans, potatoes, squash, corn, pumpkin.
Potatoes and corn, huge.
Absolutely huge. These were often easier to grow and far more calorically dense than many traditional European staples. This dietary revolution led to a significant increase in the European population and longer life expectancies, even for the poorest citizens. It profoundly boosted Europe's demographic and economic strength. Plus, they got things like vanilla, tobacco, chocolate.
But for the Americas, the impact was, of course, catastrophic. What were the most devastating consequences for Native Americans?
The impact on Native Americans was indeed catastrophic. It represents one of the deadliest demographic events in human history. Europeans unwittingly brought diseases like smallpox, typhus, measles, to which Native Americans had absolutely no acquired immunity.
No immunity at all.
None. This resulted in a devastating demographic collapse, with estimates ranging from 50 to 90 million deaths. It's hard to even comprehend that scale. This also had a profound psychological impact, as Europeans often seemed immune, while native populations perished en masse. Beyond disease, there was inevitable conflict over land and resources. Europeans also introduced domesticated animals like horses, cows, pigs. Horses, in particular, did have a positive impact in some regions, making transportation and hunting far easier for many Native American groups. But there were also less welcome arrivals, invasive species, rats, and the intermarriage between European men and Native women led to the emergence of a mixed European and Native American population known as mestizos.
This massive exchange then laid the groundwork for the complex and brutal transatlantic triangle trade. How did this economic system connect three continents, and what was its core purpose? It sounds grim.
It was grim. The triangle trade was a core economic system of the Atlantic world, built on the principle of moving goods from where they were plentiful to where they were scarce to maximize profit. It intricately involved three main points: Europe, Africa and the Americas. The most brutal leg, the infamous Middle Passage, involved the forced migration of enslaved people from West Africa to the Americas. This filled the massive labor shortage caused by the decimation of native populations by disease and the general unwillingness of Europeans to perform the arduous manual labor required for new plantation economies, especially sugar.
Primarily sugar plantations.
The vast majority of these enslaved individuals were taken to sugar plantations in Brazil and the Caribbean, yes. Then, the Americas supplied plantation crops, like sugar, the most lucrative commodity, rice, tobacco, cotton, back to Europe. These raw materials couldn't be grown in Europe's climate, making them incredibly valuable. Europe then took these raw materials and refined them into finished goods like rum from sugar. This was a key aspect of mercantilism. The mother country kept the manufacturing jobs, the profits, the right to tax these products, forcing colonists to buy them back, and Europe also sent manufactured goods, guns, alcohol to Africa to trade for more enslaved people, completing the triangle.
A sobering picture. What was life like for those enslaved people, especially on the sugar plantations, which were the driving engine of this horrific system?
Life on those sugar plantations, particularly in the Caribbean and Brazil, was incredibly brutal. Unimaginably harsh. Life expectancy for an enslaved person was tragically short, often estimated at around 3 years after arrival.
3 years?
3 years. The immense profitability of sugar meant it was considered cheaper by plantation owners to literally work people to death and continuously resupply from Africa than to invest in their long-term care or allow for natural population growth through families. They worked in gangs for 10, 11 hours a day, 6 days a week, under cruel conditions enforced by harsh slave codes. To prevent plotting and rebellion, they were often intentionally forced to speak Gula, a simplified language blending Portuguese and African words, specifically designed to manage sugar production and limit subversive communication between diverse groups.
So resistance was difficult.
Extremely difficult on a large scale. Resistance was typically localized, often involving breaking tools or slowing work. Organizing large-scale rebellions was incredibly challenging given the communication barriers, the deliberate mixing of ethnic groups, and the overwhelming force used by the planters.
Wow, that was a truly expansive deep dive through the early Americas and European interactions. From the competing theories of arrival to the stark contrasts in worldviews and the differing colonial paths of Spain, France, and the Netherlands. We've covered a tremendous amount of ground.
We really have. We've seen how geography shaped native societies like the Pueblo, Chinook, and Chumash, how European ambitions for God, glory, and gold, coupled with technological advances, spurred exploration, and the profound, often tragic consequences of the Columbian Exchange and the transatlantic triangle trade.
So as you tackle your test, remember that history isn't just dates and names. It's about understanding the why and connecting the dots between these massive forces. Think about the direct questions you'll face on origins, motives, adaptations, those colonial comparisons. Understanding these interconnections will be your superpower.
That's right. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, maybe leave you with this thought. The seeds of global interconnectedness, our modern economic systems, even racialized social structures, were undeniably sown in these early interactions. How do you see the echoes of these foundational differences and exchanges still playing out in our world today?
That's a powerful thought to mull over. Good luck with that test, deep diver. You've absolutely got this. We hope this deep dive has given you the knowledge and confidence you need.
Until next time, keep digging, keep questioning, and keep learning.